All right, welcome to the CEDS Ontology webinar. We have a lot to pack into an hour, so we are going to jump right in. We're going to start with a couple of polls for everyone to participate in. And the first poll we're going to bring up is your familiarity with CEDS. So you're going to see this pop up either in front of your screen right there. It may also pop up in the chat, depending on how your Teams is set up. But if you see the poll, there are 8 options. So if you can scroll up and down and take a look at the different options. Just you're familiar with CEDS on a scale of 1 to 8. Number 1, how do you spell CEDS? Never even heard of CEDS, know what CEDS is. Number 8, I'm responsible for elements or data models that exist within CEDS. So you've actually helped in the development of the standard itself. Number 4, you've been to the website about various different CEDS websites 30 times in the last year. So go ahead and submit your answer for your familiarity with CEDS. Give us an idea of who is on the call. Looks like we got some answers coming in. Got a couple of 2s, got some 3s. 3s are winning at this point. Haven't visited the CEDS website quite as many times this year, but we do have some 4s and some 6s. Very good. 7, that's impressive to see. 18% feel like you're pretty good. You know all about CEDS. Now, if you've opened a ticket in the open source community, if you participated in work groups, then you're responsible for elements or data models that exist in CEDS because you've actually contributed to those different things. So give this a second or 2 more. Looks like we got several people kind of new to CEDS. They know about it, but looks like level 3 is the one that's going to win. And then we have some fairly good amount that are strongly aware of CEDS and have good familiarity with it. So great. I'm going to close that poll. And then the second poll we're going to bring up, because of what we're talking about today, is the ontology. And so for this poll, it's going to be your familiarity with web ontology language, or the term semantic triple. And again, there's 8 options there. So on a scale of 1 to 8, you may have to scroll down to see the 8. The number 1, that's why I'm here. Maybe you can explain it to me. So that might be you. Number 4, subject, predicate, object. That makes sense to me. And we're not talking about diagramming sentences. Maybe we are a little bit, but for the most part, we're not. So if that makes sense to you, you know what that means from a triple standpoint. You can select that one. And then number 8, for the most familiarity, you've actually created ontologies. And then a little click disclaimer. If you do click number 8, you have to understand that you're volunteering to help assist in the CEDS ontology work. Because if you have actually created them, then we're going to recruit you. So feel free to submit anywhere in the range that you are on that one, and we'll take a look. Quite a few at the number 1 level. It's great, although we have 9% there at 8. So I guess definitely volunteer. The group will be meeting back up in about a month or 2 as we start to discuss the comments coming in from the review of this one. And so we're going to start discussing changes and updates, as well as beginning work on the K-12 domain, which we'll talk about. So give this a second or 2 more to go ahead and answer that poll. But it looks like the bulk of them are at that number 1. That's why I'm here. Maybe you can explain it to me. We hope we can do that in the hour. So I'm going to close that poll, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Here's our agenda for today. Right here. So we're hoping to leave time at the end for Q&A, but definitely feel free throughout the presentation to ask any questions in chat. So you're not able to come off mute, but through the chat, ask any questions. We'll either answer them directly in the chat, as we have different people paying attention to that, or they may go ahead and interrupt us, which is fine, and we will answer as we go. So that's what we're going to do. Our presenters today are Nancy Sharkey, research scientist and the CEDS SLDS program lead with the National Center for Education Statistics. So from the U.S. Department of Education, we also have Nathan Clinton presenting, who is the CEDS solutions architect, and then myself, Dwayne Brown. I'm the open source community lead. At this point, with logistics out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy Sharkey to kick the whole thing off.
Well, hi, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming. It's Thursday afternoon for most people, and just thanks for participating in this. I thought the survey at the beginning that you just saw was interesting. I think, what do you know about ontologies? I would say I'm maybe a 2, and that's only because we did a walkthrough of the webinar the other day. So that's my familiarity with this. So I'm very excited to get into this work as well. I think when we think about CEDS, I know you're probably familiar with the if you build it, or if we build it, they will come terminology from I think Field of Dreams. But I think when it comes to CEDS, it's more like if you ask for it, we will build it, or if you come, we will build it. Sort of a flip on that phrase, because as you could see from the stakeholders requested an ontology, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Michigan all asked for pieces of this, and as a result, we thought this is something that's needed for the field because the field is asking for it. Also, when I say we will build it, I'm using we as everyone here on this call, the CEDS team, the SLDS folks, and also departments of education all around the country, as well as standards groups and other business organizations associated with building and using SLDS systems, as well as just figuring out what data people are using and need and how to put it all together. So you can see the lists of departments of ed, EdFi, Coleridge, Access for Learning, Bardic Systems, Cedar Labs. I won't read all of them, but you can see it's a pretty wide group of people who've been involved in developing the ontology to where we are right now. Lots of hours of data modeling and data modeling was spent to develop the ontology with the support of all of these groups. So we're really grateful for the participation of the field. And we are very excited about the continued participation of the field as we go forward. The development of the ontology requested by stakeholders and developed by stakeholders so far is really to ensure that CEDS is future ready for the stakeholders. We want to make sure that this is useful. And as more and more organizations make the switch to cloud infrastructure, the ability to express CEDS through machine readable languages is quite frankly essential to ensure the success of all of the stakeholders who are trying to use CEDS. And the ontology will be the foundation for all of this work going forward. So once again, I want to just thank everyone for coming. I'm learning right along with you, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to support this work as well. And with that, I will turn it back to the team.
Thanks, Nancy. She mentioned the creation of CEDS. The ontology wasn't just a whim. It's the product of stakeholder requests and decisions that were made by that work group, and you saw the participants there. If I left anybody out, I apologize. Please email me. We do have a contributors page where we'll add you into the CEDS ontology where all those organizations are listed. Some of you on the call may know very well what an ontology is and have done significant amount of modeling, as we saw in the poll. And some of you, maybe you remember hearing the word ontology from high school. And there's a good chance you could spell it since it's on the screen right there. So we're going to try to accommodate that whole range of individuals in this webinar. And we're going to start by touching on what is an ontology at a high level and why CEDS is going down this particular path. And hopefully by the end of the webinar, you have a good foundation to start with. So what is an ontology? The first thing you may notice is that it was developed by people who are either very fond of owls or perhaps need a little help in understanding how acronyms generally function. So WOL does not spell owl, but I guess for acronyms, you can just willy-nilly move the letters around. But I know it's going to come up. It came up the first time I showed it to other people on our team. They're like, why is that not wool? There you go. But that's really not on point. So we're going to get back on point. First, an ontology is a language that is designed to represent rich and complex knowledge about things, groups of things, and then the relations that exist between those things. And that first bullet is really CEDS at its core. It's all about defining. That's what CEDS does. Defining the elements, defining the option sets, making sure that language is understood and that we have the definitions. We have done some work relating to defining relationships. Some of that's in our integrated data store model, but not in as great a detail as goes into an ontology, which you're going to see later on in this presentation, some of what we're proposing. Second bullet, it's also a computation and can be read by computers. So essentially an ontology, it's machine readable. And the development of this for CEDS, it positions CEDS, as Nancy mentioned, well for cloud-based computing. It's future ready. Our stakeholders are moving in this direction. CEDS needs to be moving in this direction as well. And then finally, third, it opens up a broader world of standards and integration with those standards. So through the CEDS ontology, we can branch out and we can refer to other ontologies that exist and create that bridge, increasing the scope of CEDS for our stakeholders. And then those ontologies also can refer back to CEDS, increasing their scope for their stakeholders and building a more cohesive model, worldwide and standards wide. So it's a resource for bringing standards together. That is something that you should know. And as one of the tickets mentioned with South Carolina and needing to connect CEDS to EdFi, right? This is why we're going down this path, because it'll help us with connection to other standards. So at this point, that's kind of a quick high level of what an ontology is, but to look a little deeper into it technically, I'm going to hand this over to Nathan, and he's going to dig a little deeper into why the ontology. And you're on mute.
Of course I am. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dwayne. So I'm Nathan Clinton. I'm going to do the technical dive into the ontology. So we do have a good kind of simple example that we'll walk over. But before we do that, I wanted to just talk about what the main components are of an ontology. So an ontology is comprised of largely four things: terms, relationships, concepts, and rules. And some of these things we already have in CEDS, as Dwayne mentioned. Terms, that was the original goal of CEDS, right? Is to have a data dictionary, define elements, come up with lists of options for some of those elements, right? To build a language, reduce ambiguity in the P20W space. So every element that we have in CEDS is being brought over into the ontology. Relationships. So relationships are not entirely new. We do have some basic relationships defined in a SQL database model that CEDS offers called the Integrated Data Store. But they are just linkages between tables in a database. They aren't named, they aren't defined, and there's very few constraints around those. So that's a huge opportunity for CEDS to further reduce ambiguity in the P20W space. Concepts. So if you think about, what's an organization, what's a person, what is membership? We do have some of those things defined in CEDS through the domain and entities page, but this ontology really allows us to really flesh out all the concepts in this space and define them. And lastly, are rules. Like what are the constraints within the data model? It's not really that's something that CEDS has right now, so that's a huge benefit from being able to build this ontology. Okay, so now, why is CEDS ontology a game changer? This is a big change for CEDS. It's a step up from the data dictionary and the SQL model. It's really to kind of joining a lot of other data standards in the world. Ontologies are commonly used. We saw Eric mention the other ontologies. The HUD's homeless ontology. This is the kind of the language that folks use to build technical, machine-readable data standards. And so they allow us to combine all of those four components, those terms, relationships, concepts, and rules that we've kind of had in various bits and pieces throughout CEDS, really bring them into one model and have everything very clearly defined. And we talked about other options when we first started the working group for the ontology, but really ontologies were the most descriptive way to model the data. And again, with the goal of reducing ambiguities as the main, the primary goal of CEDS, it really made a lot of sense to make this transition. So ontologies also are they enable distributed modeling. That means that if CEDS, we've created this ontology, we're going to keep expanding it. Other data standards, other people can use the ontology in defining new and creative ways to solve other use cases, right? And actually CEDS, as it's been built, was largely a kind of a collection of various bits and pieces from other data standards kind of pulled together. And so CEDS acts as kind of the glue from all those other previous existing data standards. And then we've, of course, filled in the gaps. that we have components from the credential transparency definition language. There are other ontologies out there where rather than redefining things, we could actually go to another standard, say, hey, we like your definition and your data element, we could bring it into CEDS. And then CEDS, of course, again, could be leveraged in other cases. PESC right now is very interested in leveraging CEDS ontology to help define post-secondary transcripts. So a case where this ontology will really serve to help at a technical level, really physical level, bring together data between standards. And overall, the CEDS ontology, it will become the master schema for CEDS. Right? Every other data model that's created and hosted by CEDS will be a derivative of this model. When we go to the website, ceds.ed.gov, the domain entity schema, all the options in the align and connect tools, if you're familiar with those tools, data mapping and use case definitions, all of those tools will be converted over to be used to use this ontology. Okay. So I'd like to walk through a very simple example, and I'm going to represent this example in a few different ways. I wanted to have a pictorial version just so we have a visual, because it's a nice, easy way to see it. But then I'll actually show you what, as we're going through these pieces, what they look like in the ontology, and then what an actual data example would look like. So in this example, we're looking at a school and a mailing address. Very simple, but it actually walks through all the main components that we talked about earlier. So I do have a key here. So all these little boxes in gray are classes. So those are the concepts. We have relationships between them that we are naming and defining. We have data properties. So these are the actual textual or numbers, the actual data that you stick into your package. And then lastly, option sets. So in CEDS, we have a lot of option sets, standard lists of values that, like the list of states. So we have defined those, and we'll talk about how those are represented in the ontology using something called an instance. So starting up at the K-12 school up here in the data model, the way this looks in the ontology is we have a class and the definition of that. So all classes, everything in an ontology is given an IRI, which is basically a URL that says this is basically the ID for this element. So you can see here we gave it a class and name, and it's on ceds.ed.gov/owl. Hashtag K-12 school, right? So whenever we're talking about a K-12 school in CEDS, we always use that IRI, and that's present. That'll be present everywhere. In an actual JSON package, so like if you were to actually try to take some data and package it up in JSON LD, which is a form of JSON used for linked data. That's what the LD is for. You would represent your data with a type attribute, and you can see we've included CEDS, the actual ontology up here, and then we have the representation of K-12 using this acronym here, along with the actual name of the element. But K-12 school, the way we've modeled this, is a subclass of an organization, right? So if you look in the ontology, you'll see that right underneath the definition of K-12 school, we have a linkage here saying that it is a subclass of organization. When you actually come down to the data, you don't see a change in the type, right? Because it is a K-12 school. But what this allows you to do is define elements at the organization level and then be able to leverage those at the school level. So in this case, that would be an organization address. So now we're going to take a look at this is called an object property. It's basically a relationship between two classes, right? So you can see here we have an object property that we've defined as has organization address, and There are two concepts here called domain and range. Domain is basically where does that arrow start in the relationship, and range is where does that arrow point to, right? And so in this case, we're saying an organization can have an address, and that's what we're representing down here in the data, right? We have this school has an address. But addresses, very similar to organizations, there are different types of addresses, right? So here we're looking at specifically a mailing address, but again, mailing address is a subtype of organization address, which is a subclass of address. And we broke those out because if you look at at each level, there are different types of attributes that you may associate with as you get more specific. Right, so further down that chain, you may add different types of attributes on, leave some out. So here's the ontology. You can see kind of the linkage. They have an address type for an organization called mailing. It is a subclass of organization address. Here's a definition for organization address. It is a subclass of address, and here's the definition of address. When we represent that in the JSON document, you're just talking about that address type for organization mailing, the mailing address. Okay, so now we can actually start to see the data at work, right? So we have an address for this school, and we have strings, we have integers, we have all sorts of different dates, times, the normal kind of stuff you would expect to see in data, right? In this case here, I'm just highlighting address, street number, and name, and the city. So those are defined up here. You can see we have address, street number, and name. It applies to addresses, and it is a type of token, which basically just means a string that is just one line long. And same for city. And we see it in representation down here, where just you have CEDS colon, street address name and number and name, and the address city. Now, when you get to a state, like I said before, a state is, there's a distinct list of states, right? And in CEDS, we've defined a class called state. So wherever we have a need for state in the model, we have one place where that is defined. So for each one of those states, for each of those states, we have what's called an instance. And that is a standard, essentially piece of data that's given that IRI, that URL, that you can then use to uniquely define that state in the standard. So we've defined, we've defined each of those, and you can see down here that we have a property called inState that points to this class, allows you to see the actual instance of the state of New York. All right, so that's a very quick and very simplified example of the ontology at work. And we hope that gives you enough to work with when we do your review and actually start getting into this. At this point, though, I think I'm going to head back over to Dwayne to talk about doing the actual review.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Now that we have a bit of foundational knowledge, I'm going to jump in and take a look at the first draft of the CEDS ontology and the resources that will help you review and comment on it. So one thing to know is that this release that's out there that you're going to be able to review, it's not all of CEDS. The ontology is going to be released in layers. The first release is intended to focus more on the core components. So if you take a look there in the middle, core, right? Just that one section there. Though we have some components of some of the other sections in this, because this is really about the design of it, and we want, from a design perspective, the review. So the comments and things that are going to come in are going to influence how we create the rest of this. So what is out there is primarily just core, looking in at that organization, person, membership, though you will see a few things that jump over slightly into enrollment, etc. And then on top of that, adding layers that where the data itself would be domain specific, like this is just for early learning or just for early learning in K-12. If it's for all 5 of those, then it's going to end up being more in the core component. But if it's something or some things that are specific to a particular domain, then it would be its own layer. So what you're looking at here is just the core, and we'll go over the roadmap in a little bit towards the end to kind of understand when and how will the rest of this be released. Okay, so that said, I'm going to walk through 4 resources that we have put out that will help you gain a better understanding of the CEDS ontology. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the guide and show you how to get there. Jackie, I'm going to have her post a link into the chat for the CEDS ontology repository so that you know how to get to that particular location. And I'm going to pull that up now. So this is the CEDS open source community GitHub site. So here we have various different things. The IDS, that's a normalized data schema resource that's been released. That's all of the CEDS elements normalized third normal form in an operational data store. We have the CEDS elements is where all the work is done to actually create new elements for CEDS or make modifications. We have a CEDS data warehouse, which is star schema based. Collaborative Exchange is where in the future we hope to see code placed that's smaller snippets that people could use to interact with resources. We have a Parquet version of the warehouse, and now we have the ontology. So clicking on the ontology location will bring you into the main page. The README is a great thing to look over there. But where we're going to head first is to the docs folder. And inside of the documents folder, these are resources that help you interact with the ontology. First thing we're going to take a look at is the ontology guide version, version 11. It's a draft. It will show up on the screen, but over here on the left side, if you do want to download it so that you have access to the PDF, you can do that. Sometimes when you're in the GitHub site, you can't always see the whole thing or it says it's too large, but you can always download the file and then view it on your own screen. So this is the ontology guide that we're going to go over, and that's going to help us understand some of the different things inside of the ontology. I'm going to bring it up over here, and I want to bring up the CEDS website next to it, and you'll see why in a second. So what you're going to notice as you go through this guide and as we go through all the different resources is that there will be mainly 6 things that we're going to be talking about. So there's 6 things listed in the guide, and ontology is more expansive than this, but these are foundational. And what we want to focus on during this draft period are these things. So that's the classes, the object properties, the data properties, the annotation properties, the data types, and the individuals, which you can see here on the right side of the screen. I'm going to go over each of these and then also attempt to relate them to things you've experienced already in CEDS with familiarity with CEDS. So the first is classes, and you can read through all of those on your own as it describes what they are, what they are. But basically, they're a way to group data. So if you were to come over to the CEDS domain entity schema, which is how people presently interact with CEDS, you can see there's various different folders: organization, identification, Nathan went over address, telephone, there's various different types of things. It's kind of like that. So you could think of classes sort of like these folders. And if I was to scroll down to an example inside of here where we see membership, each of these, person, membership, role, organization, these represent classes. So there's groupings of data that are going to be inside of that. And there's going to be additional information about a role, additional information about a membership, additional information about a person. So thinking at it like kind of in a folder structure is a way to start to begin to interact with classes and understanding how those work. And the next thing that we have is object properties. And these are going to represent relationships that exist between individuals of different classes. The closest thing we have to this is the CEDS integrated data store model. And that shows, it's like I mentioned on the screen before, it's an integrated data store. It's an operational data store, third normal form. If you haven't used it, then you're really not as familiar with the relationships. You can see some of the relationships here in the folder structure, that an organization has identification, an organization has an address. So the beginnings of relationships there, but the IDS would show how all the elements are related to each other. But those relationships are not defined really well in CEDS. They just exist. With object properties, what we're actually proposing, and you're going to be seeing throughout this, is that we're proposing defining the relationships. So I scroll down here, we'll take a look at race. And in this, you can kind of see what here as identifies as race. So a person, which is a class, gives you information about a person. And then we have race, which is also a class that gives you information about what a race is. And then here we have this relationship identifies as race. So we have a person who identifies as a race, and that race is one of these races or more than one of these races. So we're talking about that middle section, which is the object property, and that's getting to where we're actually defining relationships between classes that exist. Now, on the rest of these, I'm not going to spend a lot of time as much. We will go over them, and I'll show them in another document. Because CEDS really actually has a lot of this already covered, or it's something we're going to borrow really from other standards. So what we're really going to focus on is the class and the object properties as we do this review and the relationships that we've created between those classes and object properties. But I will go over these other ones briefly. The data properties, from a CEDS perspective, this is just a list of any element in CEDS that does not have a standard option set. So if I was to go over here to organization name, it's a text field. It's alphanumeric, 60 characters maximum. You have a definition. There's no option set. There's no enumeration that's standardized related to that. Thus, it's been placed as a data property. So you will find the data properties, as Nathan showed, with the different address information living inside of classes, and that's how they would be expressed. So that's that one. That's what data properties is actually going to be. Annotation properties. I will show you these later because it'll be easier to display them, but they're really just metadata that is provided about classes, object properties, data properties, individuals. So the easiest way to kind of describe that is here is the definition. So we have organization name, right? But this definition is metadata really about organization name. This global ID in CEDS is really metadata about the organization name. So there's additional information that's applied to an element to give you more information. It's applied to a class or it's applied to a data property. So that's what annotations are, is additional data. Data types, these are things like date, integer, decimal, again, going back to organization name. It's alphanumeric, it's 60 characters maximum. This would end up being probably a token. As Nathan mentioned earlier, what a token is the single string. So other standards like schema.org, they've defined numerous data types, and we are just really going to point to those. Not reinventing anything is the best way to do things. So the data types, for the most part, are pointed to. And then finally, we have individuals, and there's more to individuals. That is to say, like Dwayne Brown, I'm an individual, and I could be represented. But that's getting more into the linked data side. But for the sake of the ontology review, what you need to know for this is those are CEDS option set values. So if I was to go to organization type, these are all would be considered individuals inside of CEDS. And that's a bad example because we'll go to state abbreviation because we handle organization types slightly differently. So these are all individuals, right? Each of these state abbreviations would be individuals inside of there. So any element that has an option set in CEDS that's defined, its options are individuals. And that particular element is a class. So the data properties are elements without option sets. Classes can be elements with option sets, and the individuals represent the option sets. So this will make more sense as we go a little bit further, but that's starting to give the foundation. So the next thing I want to do is scroll down to an address, which is kind of the example that Nathan gave, to take a look at this. So you can see some of these working together. So address is a class because it's a grouping of information, right? We grouped information together, and thus we created a class called address. And out of address, we're expressing some CEDS elements that don't have option sets: the address postal code, the latitude, the longitude, the county name, address, street number, and name, etc. We're giving these data types. This is a token. Latitude, longitude would be decimals, right? But we're also creating a relationship between address and state. State is a class, but we're going to say that this address is in this particular state, and in state is an object property. So we've created a relationship between address and state. And then from state, we can actually express inside of that, it would contain the state abbreviation, and that would then be an individual where it would have the ability to show you the individuals of the state abbreviations themselves. So there's these relationships that exist are what we're actually structuring in this ontology, and each of these components are made up inside of the structure of it. All right, next we're going to take a look at the ontology in a machine readable format. So I'm going to jump back over into ontology here. I'm going to go back to the ontology homepage where we were. So if you need help getting back there, the link that she had put in the document, here's the front page, or she had put in the chat, back to the ontology. And then we're now going to, instead of going to the documents folder, we're going to head over to the source folder. And this is where we contain the actual release. This is what the draft release that is out there to be reviewed, but it's a machine readable document. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the RDF version of this. It's going to come up, and I'm going to go ahead and download this. And then I'm going to open it. Now, this can be viewed on screen as you saw that in there, but as the files start to get larger, you might not be able to view them in the actual repository, and so those can be downloaded in a variety of other tools. This particular tool is called Notepad++. You can do it in Notepad, as most of you have that, but Notepad++ is a free tool that you can download. It'll Jackie post a link to that resource in the chat if you want to look at it. In this particular tool, your organization's policies will determine whether you can use it or not from a security standpoint. But generally, you'll have access to Notepad, and that's one tool that you could use to open to take a look at this. It's a machine readable file. Here we have the annotation properties. So we're going to see the same 6 things. So if I did like a search for object properties, there. Here's the object properties, and it's going to give information about them. If I did a search for the classes, you're going to see those are in there. So the same 6 things that we talked about are located inside of this file. And it's really just a way for a machine to be able to read through it and understand what we're talking about when we talk about the ontology. So all 6 of those are in that. So I'm not going to go too much detail into that because for the webinar's sake, this is machine readable. This is the actual ontology machine readable format, but I want you to be able to view it in a way that is human readable because on the call I presently have humans. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is an Excel version of this. So I'm going to jump back over into here and go back into the ontology page. For this one, we're going to jump back up to the documents folder. And we're going to go, instead of the ontology guide, the core draft, and it's an Excel file. And then for this one, we have to download, can't view it raw here. So download the file, and it's going to bring this up. You're going to see the same 6 things: the classes, the object properties, the data properties, the annotation, data types, and individuals. I'll go over domain range in a second, but essentially what we're looking here is it makes it just going to make it easier for you to see them. I'm going to start with the annotation properties. And so here, not very long, not much to that, but you can see a list basically of labels that we use to describe the other entities. So in this version of the ontology, we've used creator, we've used description, we've used identifier and label. Those are the primary 4 that we're using. And the prefix in front describes the standard who maintains that particular annotation property created. So DC, Dublin Core, for instance. If it doesn't have a prefix, it's one that CEDS is likely to look at adding as a label that we want. So this is basically just the ability to describe additional detail about it. So next we're going to look at the individuals tab. And this is simply a list, as I mentioned, of all of the CEDS options that are part of this core draft. In the headers here, you can see some of the annotation properties. So here's DC description, here's DC identifier, here's sort order. So these are 3 of the annotation properties that exist over inside of here: sort order, identifier, description, which basically just provides you with additional information about what it is we're talking about. We're talking about this individual, which is public, and this IRI. This is an option set in CEDS. It's an option set for what? It's an option set for administrative funding control. That's the element in CEDS, and this identifier identifies that particular element. So you can see same identifier for administrative funding control. IRI, public, private, other, those are option sets within CEDS that we have there. There's also this column called IRI. That's the internationalized resource identifier. This should be absolutely globally unique to that one option value. It's uniquely CEDS because you can see we're using ceds.ed.gov, the website. indicating the standard who created it. Included in the included in it also then is the element name, administrative funding control, and then the option set underscore public, which makes this a unique IRI, so a unique identifier for this particular option set of that one element. So there's not a lot to review here because it is just the option sets. I'm going to move over to the data types tab, and this one, not a lot to review here either. We are assigning these to various different elements. So to the data properties, which are elements that don't have option sets, we will assign these. But here you have things like, is it a decimal? So the data that's going to come across, the data we're going to see for this particular thing, should it be a decimal? Should it be a date time? Should it be a name? Should it be a token, as we mentioned? Should it just be time itself and not date time? Should it be a string? So there's various different data types that exist. Not a lot to review there either, aside from, did we apply, in your opinion, the right data type to the right data property? So that's something as far as review that could take place. So now we have 3 tabs left, which is, oh wait, no, I got a data properties. We have data properties still. And I mentioned these before, not a lot to review here because these are CEDS elements that don't have option sets. So they should, the description is the definition of the element, the IRI is the element name, the identifier is there, the data property itself we have. So it's all just elements that do not have CEDS option sets. How we begin to relate all these guys to each other is where the real review comes from and the real the work takes place. So the 3 tabs that I have left are classes. So in classes, if the class has a description, so let me scroll up here. If the class itself, which is the label we're giving it, if it has a description, then it's a CEDS element that has an option set. It's not a lot to review there because that's the rule we're placing on this, unless you disagree with that concept of doing it that way. The rule we're placing that is it has an option set, it becomes a class. If it has a super class, as this one does, then it's likely an option set within CEDS. So quick example of this, you can see organization inside of there. If I pull up the organization type within CEDS, you can see the options: employer, K-12 school, LEA, IAU, various different things. We've made those into subclasses. So accrediting organization, affiliated institution, and there's various different others. So K-12 school, LEA, all of those would be subclasses of organization. So in general, those are also not needing as much review other than architecturally. Do you agree with the decision and how we've created the architecture from class to subclass? Now, the ones that don't have a description and don't have a superclass, those are brand new. So taking a look at those and reviewing them is something that would be good to do because that's how we decided to name it. And you'll see the relationships that exist and how we've put elements inside of those. Object properties, this is all brand new. These are the definitions for the relationships themselves. So you can see in here, we have various different things generally treated as a verb. And then we have the draft definitions. So this would be something to take a look at. And what this particular object property points to is this class. So these are the classes that we're pointing to. And then over on domain range, you can see we have listed all of the domains, which is a class. So a person is a class, an organization is a class. And then we said that they do this. They follow the salary scale, and then we bring you over to a range, which is another class. So this kind of describes all the relationships that we have in place for that. So that's the way to look at the Excel spreadsheet. And I have one last thing to show you because a picture is worth 1,000 words. If I jump back over into here, Jackie's going to put a link into the chat. And this is for it's a free resource. It's changed what I do not want to reload. It's for a free resource called Protege from Stanford University, which makes it a little bit easier to actually review. Again, it's organization policies, whether you can download it from a security standpoint. But one of the things that it has available is what's called this ontograph. So inside of here, you can still see classes, object properties, data properties, annotation properties, data. All the things we've been talking about the whole time is what makes up the ontology. But if you want to see it in a picture, in the windows, in the tabs, there's a way to select and add in ontograph. And basically what this does for you is allows you to grab anything that is inside the ontology and then expand it to start to take a look and see how we've created those relationships. So for membership, you can see there's an organization. That organization, the membership is a member of the organization, but the organization itself here is has membership and members. You can see a person. The person here is a member of membership, and the reason why membership person isn't directly a member of the organization is because membership has additional elements like entry dates and exit dates and things that are applied to that need to be grouped in this particular location. You can see here organizations relate to each other. An organization can authorize another organization. An organization can just relate to another organization without any authority or hierarchical. So this particular resource here is something that's valuable for being able to take a look. If you're bored and you want to look at the entire thing sometime, you can click on Val, and it's crazy. It takes a while to actually expand out. So we're not going to go there. But this resource lets you look at that. Okay. So those are the different resources. Now we're going to talk about how you actually can go in and review these. So how to comment. In the actual location on the website, which I'm going to take you to right now, CEDS Ontology, there is a tab called Issues. And inside the Issues tabs, you have two things you can do. You can either create a new issue, or you can look through the various different issues here and comment on those. So you can see I've opened two issues. One related to the IRI itself and how we've named it. So example, we've named English Learner Status as a class, and then we've put _ yes as an individual. Is that the right way to do this going forward? A lot of what you're going to be telling us over the next 90 days is foundational to how we'll develop out the rest of the ontology, and these are the kind of things that we need to know. So I've just thrown this out saying, would it be better if we did it this way, or would it be better if we did it this way with a numerical ID? Right? And then add that. Or would it be better if we did it this way with a numerical ID and created a numerical ID for an option set, which we never did before? But there's impact to that as far as being able to be human readable. It's a machine readable thing, but still humans are going to interact with this and have to write things like JSON code. And then we had a comment already from Phil Barker indicating the same concept as far as being machine readable versus human readable. So these are things that we're looking for you to comment on. So again, you can go into the issues, you can point out things by creating one, you can comment on anything that you'd like, and then to provide feedback. It's a free account, so GitHub allows you to create a free account. You don't need the paid for account because it's an open source community. All of this is available from GitHub for free because they like people to share resources. So you can create an account and do that. So if you want to create a new issue, you can click on new issue, ask a question, make a comment, review anything you'd like. If you're curious about some of the questions that we actually have, and you go to the CEDS Ontology page on the README section, here's some things overall. Any comments related to it, anything at all, but relationships. Do the relationships make sense? Are we missing any in between relationships? And we give some examples. Would you recommend a different name for the class? The object properties for sure. Do you like the name of the object property? Is there a better way we should describe it? Are the definitions correct on the various different things? Typos, anything at all. Additional resources is a great thing. Are you aware of any other resources that could be used in the creation or the expression of the ontology? Are there other ontologies that are connected to education or that are widely adopted in other communities that would be a good resource to review? So anything at all that you can think of in relation to commenting on the ontology would be good. That's commenting. Some questions, the IRI, which I mentioned, other things to look for, the class names, the object properties, definitions, and typos we went over. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the roadmap. This is where we are right now. At the beginning, the initial draft release, which is right now, we released it at the end of August of 2023. There's a 90-day review on that. What we're really hoping to get is feedback. If the entire thing gets upended and changed, and the comments that it's okay, we'll rebuild, we'll change. It's important that we get this foundational piece right because it's going to influence the rest of it. We only get one chance at doing this the right way. Once it's out and it becomes implemented, it's very hard to change things. So we just want to make sure that we're doing this the best way. So we are welcoming any and all comments, not just, hey, great job, but you should do this instead. So those are all welcomed. So through this 90-day review period, we're looking for that. The other ticket that was open from South Carolina was related to being able to connect CEDS and EdFi together. And so we've begun an EdFi gap analysis. We're going to complete that in October. So by the end of October 2023, we'll show completed a complete gap analysis between every EdFi element and what is in CEDS. That document is then going to be used to inform the next pieces of the ontology that we create. As I pointed out, that layer document where we had the ontology, the core pieces, and then you saw a K-12 layer. The next thing that we'll do, which it's all based off of stakeholder input, right? So the stakeholder said, build this. And one of the stakeholders said, I need it for EdFi, and that's why I want you to build it. So we're moving in that direction second. So that will influence that gap analysis, what we build next as far as the layer. And the goal is to release that by December of 2023. So there'll be like a K-12 EdFi layer. It won't be EdFi specific, but anything in EdFi that we need, like assessments, or if we needed facilities, or if we needed credentials or learning resources, or whatever we need from that gap analysis, that's what we build next as far as the layers are concerned. And we'll release that in December. And what we build on that is going to be greatly influenced by the initial draft release we're doing here. So foundationally, what you share with us will influence as we build that as well, and as we re-release the core draft, the core itself, probably around the same time as the release of the EdFi piece. So there'll be a core release and the EdFi K-12 piece in December. From all of that on the 90-day review, we'll immediately begin working in December on the full CEDS ontology. It's a rather aggressive timeline, but our goal is by May of 2024 to release all layers, all components, every CEDS element, a full complete ontology, for then a 90-day review starting in May of 2024. Okay, that's a lot to pack in to 1 hour, but somehow we did it. Do we have questions in the chat? Any at all that you want to? Feel free, but go ahead.
We're getting a couple of questions here now, Dwayne. Some have been asked and replied to already, but one that just came in says, could you share your use cases? What kinds of queries are you trying to support? Your answers would help me to evaluate the classes and relationships in ontology. Also, I think teams should look at FHIR4.
Yeah, that's from healthcare. That's absolutely, I mean, that's one of the use cases right there, right? Is the ability to connect from this ontology to another one. So where CEDS can end and people start to say, well, I need healthcare data, or I need additional data from credentials. I want to be able to move credential data across, right? Well, then you need to go to credential transparency definition language. But we can build into this ontology the equivalencies where here's where CEDS ends and here's where CTDL begins. Here's where CEDS ends, and then here is where FHIR begins, right, for health. Like at some point, I've actually worked on some projects or looked at those where they're trying to combine some healthcare data and some education data, right? Do you need to add all the education data into health? Do you need to bring all the health data into education? Doesn't make sense. So how do we create those connections? So that's absolutely one use case that we're looking at. The EdFi was another use case that came up. So the ability to take the EdFi data that's coming in, and it's coming in via an API and via the EdFi standard, but they want to load it into a CEDS data warehouse, right? So South Carolina has this plan to load it into a CEDS resource. What we're looking at as far as this ontology is you can almost think of it as like not a gate, but the door to come into the CEDS resources. So if you can get your data into a CEDS structure, into this CEDS ontology JSON format, then we can take it from there and load the CEDS integrated data store, load the CEDS warehouse, load the Parquet files, just store the data as JSON, whatever it is that you need to do with that particular data, we can make the conversion from that standard over to the other one. So I would say that's probably two of the primary use cases right there for that. I think I saw a question too that came through. Massachusetts, Iowa, Oklahoma will need to make sure we don't break the tight CIF CDS relationship, which is already mapped and assumed. And PESC relies on those mappings too. We've actually had conversations already. We're in conversation with PESC very deeply in relation to the use of CEDS for the same reason, right? We need to not invent something new. And so PESC is looking at if we need something additional, this ontology will help us to bring that in. And the same thing for CEDS. If we need, PESC is already out there. So we're tightly coupled with all those. CEDS doesn't make any kind of a decision as far as elements being added to CEDS unless we first looked at what already exists in the standard space, whether it be CIF or EdFi or PESC or CTDL or HR Open. We're actually doing some looking at that right now with HR Open standards, and creating that collaboration. One unique thing about this particular ontology in relation to CIF is your ability to expand CIF. So for those states that are using Access for Learning, once we've completed this ontology and we have the ability then to express it in JSON, because CIF's infrastructure is decoupled from their architecture, you could also additionally add in components of CEDS directly into an API structure that CIF is able to then transport across. So if you're like, hey, we need to add this to CIF, but it's already in CEDS, guess what? You can just transport it across the CIF wire, and you don't have to add it to the CIF specification. If it's not there, you already have the ability to transport it. So it's just starting to bring those standards together, to be able to communicate well and to bring alignment between them. Other questions? We have like 2 minutes. Did you see anything else come through?
I did not.
Okay. Jackie's posted an ontology resource document. Some of the basics as far as the questions that we're looking at, has all the resources that we talked about in case you aren't aware of where the links are, or you missed any of that. That document will give you links to the Excel spreadsheet and to the guide and to the various different places that we talked about on here, and how to review it. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to CEDS. There's our email address there and the website. And I think we are right at time. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day.